My name is Palmer McKay. I am interviewing Vietnam veteran Ole Olson, who served in the Army and was in Vietnam from 1968 to 1969. Mr. Olson, this interview will have 4 sections: your life before service, basic training, your time in Vietnam, and your life after service. Let's get started with your background. Where did you grow up, and what was your area known for?
I was born in Florida, in Ocala, Florida, and which at that time was primarily an agricultural community. It's grown way beyond that now, and we moved several times. I lived for a short time in Clearwater, Florida, and then we moved to Punta Gorda, and then I graduated from high school in Okeechobee, Florida, which is a cow town. That's basically it, you know.
Can you tell me about your family growing up?
My dad was a Minnesota farm boy, and my mother was a Southern Mississippi belle of the ball. Yet to figure out how those two got together. They both had previous marriages, so I had 2 brothers by my dad's first marriage, and a brother and sister by my mom's first marriage. And then in the family that I grew up in, there was 3 of us. I have a sister and a brother.
Would you describe your dad's job as blue collar, white collar, or something else?
White collar. He was in the title insurance business, and whenever you sell a piece of property, they run an abstract on it to make sure the title is clear. So he was definitely white collar.
Do you have any memories of your father or other men around you telling war stories from World War II?
My dad, I think, had some political ambitions, and he wanted to be in the JCs because that would have bumped his standings a little bit. But I think the JCs has an upper age limit of 35. Well, he was already over 35 when he ran for tried to get in the JCs.
What are the JCs?
Junior Chamber of Commerce. And World War II broke out, and Dad was, I guess, in his about 40 or 41, and because he'd been telling that little story, he got drafted, and he wasn't going to lie his way out of it, because then everybody would have thought he was a coward. So Dad served in the Navy on the battleship New York, and my oldest brother, or half-brother, was 24 years older than me. I was not around. He and Dad were in the Navy at the same time. And then the other brothers, one served in the Korean War and was a POW for a short time. Was repatriated very quickly, and one brother was in the service during the Korean conflict, but served all his time stateside as a drill instructor. And then my whole brother was, he just never got called. He carried a 1A draft card for years, but he just never got called, so don't volunteer. Yeah.
Did your dad or brother ever tell World War II stories?
My dad, not so much. He talked. He was mostly in the Caribbean. I don't think he saw any action as such. The brother that was in, he served as I guess the modern day version of a SEAL, the underwater demolition team. And he wouldn't talk about it. He just unpleasant memories, I guess.
And your brother, who was a POW, Did he ever talk about that experience?
Only briefly. When I came back from Vietnam, he and I sat around indulging in adult beverages, shall we say. And he just mentioned when he was repatriated that a full bird colonel came to see him and asked him, he said, anything you want, we can get it for you. And my brother told me he wanted to speak to his mother on the telephone. Well, this is from Korea, and this is before the days of cell phones and everything else. He said, we can do that. He said, it'll take a little while, but we can do that. He said, what else do you want? He said, I want a chocolate malted milkshake. And he said, I can get you a milkshake. He said, no, I want a chocolate malted milkshake. And that'll take a little longer, but I can do that too. So he did that. And that's really the only thing that he ever told me about, his experiences. And
did you have a favorite World War II movie growing up?
Not that I can think of. I think my favorite World War II movie of all time is Saving Private Ryan. There were just so many World War II movies when I was a chap that it'd be hard to pick one. I liked them all.
A lot of Vietnam veteran memoirs mention John Wayne as an influence on their expectations of war. Do you remember John Wayne that way?
It seemed like, he was in a lot of war movies and a lot of cowboy movies too. Just a manufactured American hero, always seemed to do the right thing at the right time.
Back then, did you see John Wayne as a manufactured American hero?
No, I thought he was the real thing. He was, he was big and huge and a towering screen presence. So.
Growing up, did you pay attention to politics?
Well, I think it was when I was about 6 years old. I was banging a drum and singing "I Like Ike." I don't know that I was greatly involved in politics. If I had been able to vote when I was a senior in high school, I would have voted for Goldwater. I guess I've been a lifelong Republican. My dad leaned that way, and when I was a senior in high school, I passed out literature for Barry Goldwater and knocked on doors.
Yeah, how did you get involved in the Goldwater campaign?
Like I say, just went to some meeting somewhere in Okeechobee, and they just asked for volunteers. Can you hand out literature? Can you knock on doors? And I said, sure. So I did.
I know you said your dad perhaps had some kind of political aspirations. Were your parents overtly political?
No, not really. I think with my dad, it was kind of a prestige thing.
Before Vietnam, where did you go to college and what did you study?
Went to Indian River Junior College. It's a community college now, but it's in Fort Pierce, Florida. And it's about 35 miles from where I graduated from high school at. And we used to ride one of the short school buses over there. I went for a year and a half, and then, I don't know, I guess I don't know if I was a college material guy or not. I thought I wanted to be a teacher, but and Mom and Dad were going through a divorce at that time, so that kind of screwed my head up a little bit, and I just dropped out.
When were you there?
66 and 67.
Did you hear anything about Vietnam during your time in college?
It was a, I don't know, it was always on the news. I don't know that it was necessarily a topic of conversations, but I can remember sitting in the student center and people talking about, well, you didn't want to drop out of school because if you did, you're going to get drafted and you were going to go to Vietnam, you know, just it seemed that way. We, little town where I graduated from high school, there was 100 people in my graduating class, and that's a county high school. And we lost 6 guys in Vietnam. That's not a real good mortality rate, you know. But here we are. You know.
Now, I'd like to move on to the start of your service and basic training. Would you describe yourself as volunteering, being commissioned, or drafted?
Well, I was suspecting that I was going to be drafted, so I went ahead and enlisted. The Army calls an infantryman 11B, 11 Bravo. That's infantryman's MOS. And I didn't want to be in the infantry, you know, so that's why I enlisted, to have a choice of something else. So.
Was that the main reason you volunteered, or were there other reasons?
I just felt fairly confident that I was going to be drafted. Back in that day, it was like you had an obligation to serve. Now it's an option, you know. You were probably going to end up being drafted and do 2 years, you know. I mean, it seemed like I knew more people that were in than I knew that weren't in, you know, during that time. That may not be true, but it seemed that way, you know.
You noted off camera that you received a draft notice after enlisting.
After enlisting, yeah.
Was it a relief to know that you would have been drafted anyway?
I just had a strong suspicion that I would be drafted, you know, and that's why I went. Excuse me. That's why I went ahead and made the jump, you know. Like I said, I wanted a little choice rather than being a grunt. You know.
Did you expect to go to Vietnam?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
What, if anything, did you know about the country of Vietnam before you enlisted?
It was hot and rainy, and I guess with everything was on the news, you know, they talked about the domino theory. If Vietnam fell, everything in Southeast Asia would fall under communism. But as far as, you know, the politics or the people or the geography, I didn't have a clue, you know.
Did you hear about that from classmates who had already been to Vietnam or people from your hometown?
Mostly just the media, I think, you know. That's when they were still doing body counts, you know.
What did you know about the Vietnam War?
That it had been going on a while and there was actually not much end in sight. You know, I've thought a lot of times that if you look at a lot of the population of that country, where guys out there working a rice paddy and trying to make a living and feed his family that he really didn't care what kind of government it was. His life wasn't going to change that much, whether it was a communist dictator or a duly elected president. You know, was they didn't care. You know, at least it seemed that way to me.
How would you describe your boot camp experience?
June, July, and August of 1967, and at Columbia, at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And as I heard other people say, it's the only place I've ever been where you could stand in mud up your knees and have sand blow in your eyes. Of course, as you know from the weather here, June, July, and August, just brutal. And I made it through. I mean, it was, you know, it was relatively tough, you know. But they toughen you up some, you know. When I went in, I weighed 140 pounds, and when I finished basic training, I weighed 155. So they, you know, they put some muscle on me and fed me. Not necessarily everything that you like to eat, but it's food, you know.
Did anyone around you struggle with boot camp?
Well, I remember there was a big Jewish young fellow. When I say big, he was like 300 pounds. And what he got to eat was what he could get in his mouth between the time that he left the chow line and got to the first garbage can. He never got to sit down. It was just shove it down. And he had some trouble. And our platoon sergeant told us, he said, and you don't walk anywhere in basic training, you run everywhere. He said, if we ever get anywhere and that fat SOB is not with you, you're going to low crawl back and get him. So whenever we break out of formation and we go right face or left face and then use double time, and we start this guy out the head of the platoon and grab him by the belt, and we toted him all over Fort Jackson, and he lost close to 100 pounds in 6 weeks. And then they recycled him, which means he just started over. He went back to week 1. And he was just crying. Of course, we were crying too. We hated to lose you because you get close, you know, you have a camaraderie there. We had a couple of guys from New York that were, I guess you would say for all practical purposes, gang members. They didn't do real well with authority, you know, and I think one of those guys ended up going to the Stout House, you know. You know, I don't remember anybody else having trouble except, you know, everybody's homesick and lonesome, you know. But
You were at Fort Jackson for basic training in June 1967.
right.
Do you remember the Howard Levy court-martial?
No, I do not.
Do you remember any kind of major court-martial that was happening at the time?
I'm trying to remember the exact dates of when Lieutenant Kelly got brought up, but I think that was when I was actually in Vietnam was when he was on trial.
For reference, Howard Levy was an Army dermatologist who refused to train Green Berets heading to Vietnam. He was court-martialed at Fort Jackson in June 1967.
When you're in basic training, you don't get a lot of time to read the newspaper and watch TV, you know. So
Do you remember any other people at Fort Jackson who resisted the war?
Who resisted the war? No. I mean, you're there. You may as well make the best of it. You know.
I'd like to move on to your time in Vietnam.
Okay.
What month did you arrive in 1968?
The 2nd of September.
Could you describe your first 24 to 48 hours in country?
Well, we got off. We left Travis Air Force Base and flew nonstop to Kyoto Air Force Base, Japan. And this is in the 707 stretch. About 250 of us on there. We stayed long enough for them to refuel in Kyoto, and then we flew into Benoit Air Force Base. And even though you're cramped, you're in a cattle car basically. It's air conditioned, and when you go outside, it's just an assault on your senses. The smell, the heat, the dust. It's just this fine red powder of dust that's in the air, and you go, damn, it's hot. And the unit I was assigned to, they said, they sort you out where you're going, this, that, and the other, and they put you in the back of a 2.5-ton truck, and you're sitting on a bench seat, and we're going to Saigon, which I don't remember what the mileage was, 15, 20 miles. And you have all these images in your head, and I'm thinking, looking at the guys in that truck bed with me, and I'm thinking, if a grenade comes in here, which one of these guys can I throw on top of it? Who am I bigger than? But it's just such a slap in the face when you get there.
Was there any barbed wire covering the truck?
No, it was wooden slats and a bench seat, and your gears are just laying in the bed of the truck, and there you are.
Can you describe the smell?
Well, it's like nothing I ever smelled before. I don't know that there was a particular odor of war there, but it wasn't like Florida. I'm trying to think of words to describe it. It was just different, diesel smoke and like I said, and dust. Lots of dust. I'm having a hard time describing odors.
What did you expect when you arrived, based on TV or stories you heard?
Well, they told us that with the unit that I was in, that we'd be transported to a hotel in Saigon. That's a loosely defined term there with a hotel. And we would be there for a couple of days while they figured out our eventual duty assignments. They I remember from coming in country and leaving when I left, that if you were coming in country, you stayed on the bottom 3 or 4 floors of this hotel. If you were leaving country, you stayed on the top 3 or 4 stories of the hotel. And everybody said, why? I said, if it gets hit, the guys that are up there, they're going to go because they're going home. We don't need them anymore. We need the guys that go. So I thought that was kind of a cruel thing. When I came back, I just slept in the lobby. I wasn't going to go upstairs. So, I don't know that I really knew what to expect. Just waiting on the aircraft to take me to my duty assignment. Yeah.
Would you describe yourself as being in combat, in the rear, or something else?
No, I was a non-combatant. I was excuse me. I fixed radios and receivers and transmitters, and I did not see a lot of actual combat just because of my MOS. Just did my job, The grunts or the infantrymen, the combatants, they called us REMFs, R-E-M-F, rear echelon, and you get the MF idea. So.
What kind of radios did you repair?
The Army at that time had about 60-pound receiver that they call an R390 tube type radio, and it almost every conceivable radio band you could dial in on this thing, and we used that to. Well, I didn't. I just fixed them, but the guys that were actually listening and decoding stuff were they would listen to the NVA and Viet Cong and try to figure out. Of course, it went through different code processes. Sometimes they were just listening to Morse code and didn't have any idea what it was, but you'd see. We call them ditty boppers because they listen to Morse code, and you just see them typing. No idea what they were typing, VN7433, it didn't mean anything. But they typed it, and then that went to hopefully decoding, so. But that R390 it was being phased out when I got there, and they started getting some of the first solid state stuff in shortly before I left. That thing weighed about 60 pounds, and the other ones came in weighed about 12. So a lot easier to work on too.
To back up just a little bit, how did you feel about being called an REMF?
Well, it didn't bother me. You take the guys that are out there in the bush and in the field. I'm sure they looked at us and like, these guys are a bunch of beachcombers, and they're actually in the trench. They're out there doing it. I have a good friend of mine from Florida that he and I were in Vietnam at the same time, but he was an infantryman, and he got 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star, and I think 3 or 4 air medals for being inserted into combat. And there's, he has a whole different perspective of the war than I did, But he did tell me, he said, it doesn't matter what you did. He said, there was really no place safe, I was safer than he was and a lot of other guys. But the REMF thing, it's, guys in the service rag on each other all the time. The guys in the Army, they rag on the Marines, and the Marines rag on the Navy, and the Navy rags on the Air Force. It's just part of being in the service, So.
Did you know at the time that you and your friend were both in country?
Yeah. We didn't have any communication, but I knew he was there, you know. He was up country from me. But
Were you primarily based in one location, or did your work take you to different bases in country?
I primarily stayed in Nha Trang, which was about 20 air miles above Cam Bay. I did do three or four temporary duties where somebody might have been short-staffed something. I went to Phu Bai, which is up close to the DMZ. Went to Pleiku in the Central Highlands, and I went to a little field station we had outside of Cam Bay for about a week, and I went to Saigon one time. But primarily I was based out of Nha Trang.
So, speaking of being in the rear, did you know anyone in the rear who bought souvenirs to suggest that they had been in combat?
Well, you'll find that with a lot of guys that I think we refer to it now as stolen valor. You know, that I know up around Pleiku there was I don't know if it was dense, but there was a significant Montagnard population up there, which is the mountain people of Vietnam. And they had I don't know where they got the wire, but they made bracelets, and they had some scratching on them that I guess meant something to the Montagnards. But a lot of guys bought those, you know, with the idea that it was showing, you know, that you'd been there. And I think most of the time they were given to the grunts by the Montagnards because they had close relationship, you know. They were pretty good guys. The Montagnards were. You know.
Did you see people who sold VC battle flags or anything like that?
I did not. No. Yeah. I did see a guy one time that had a little necklace with little knots on it, and I asked somebody, I said, "What's the necklace?" And they said, "Ears." You know, so, and you were only supposed to cut off one if you killed a guy, but this, I'm assuming they were ears. I wasn't going to ask the guy, but, you know, it's.
You were only supposed to cut off one if you
killed a guy. Yeah, you couldn't have two. That wouldn't have been right. You know, I don't know. I don't know why that is. You know.
Was that a social rule?
No, it was just the way it was. You know, I guess you'd say it was a social rule among the grunts. You know.
How would you describe the people you served with in terms of economic background, race, or religion?
I was in the Army Security Agency, which was a division of intelligence. And it wasn't cloak and dagger stuff. It was all electronic intelligence, and they always told us that we were the top 10% of mental capabilities, I guess you would say, of the service. Most of the guys in there were fairly sharp. In my company when I was in Vietnam, I think we had 3 blacks or African Americans, whichever term you prefer. We had 2 Native Americans, and we had several Menhunis, which Hawaiians call themselves. Menhuni's a Hawaiian leprechaun, you know. But we had several of those in there. But you know, everybody was pretty good guys, you know.
And this is out of how many?
I think there were 200 in my company, or right at, So.
What's a Hawaiian leprechaun?
A Menehune. That's the name that the Hawaiian young men had for themselves, And when I was going through AIT at Fort Devens, they had which is in Massachusetts, they had what they call TTC, Tactical Training Course. That if you were going to Vietnam, you had to go through TTC. As the Army thinks, because so much of the landscape of Massachusetts looks just like Vietnam, if you're high. But the Menehunes there were the aggressors. So as you go out there going through the course, you're supposed to be moving from point A to point B, and these guys are going to raid you in one thing or another. And if they take out too many of you, you don't get to ride the truck anymore, which you never get to ride the truck. But that's the name that the Hawaiian guys had for themselves, the Menehunes, and that's what they say. It's a Hawaiian leprechaun, So. And most of those guys were shorter of stature. Excuse me.
Did the Native Americans or Hawaiians practice different religions than Protestantism or Catholicism?
I don't really know. I can only remember one time when we had a chaplain come through the company. Now there was a chapel on base, but it was sparsely attended. But we had a lieutenant colonel came through the company one time, and he set up shop in the company day room, and anybody wanted to come in and talk to him, that kind of thing. Could, but I don't remember a lot of religious activity when I was there.
Did you also serve in Vietnam with any other nationalities like Koreans or Australians or members of ARVN?
There was a battalion of Korean soldiers in the company area immediately next to us, called the White Horse Cavalry. They went out on a regular basis into the countryside, and there were a lot of stories, tales about them. But everybody had the notion that they were damn good soldiers, And they had a little bar in their company area, and we used to go there and frequent them, and pretty good troops. I met a couple of Aussies, did not serve with them. There were some Thais there. Trying to remember if there were any other groups there or not. That's all I can recall.
Do you remember any women on base, either Vietnamese or American?
Well, we had what we call house girls who cleaned up the barracks for us. So we, and you pay them a nominal amount, like $5 a week or something, and they would do your laundry and that kind of stuff. As far as serving in a military thing, the only ladies that I saw were in the dispensary, which was close to my company area, and I'm sure there were some at the hospital, which is over at the air base. But I did not see a lot of women when I was there. Of course, there wasn't a lot of women in Vietnam, period, but they certainly did a job over there, that's for sure.
circling back to the topic of religion, did you or anyone you served with experience a change of faith in the war zone?
Not that I can recall.
How did living in Vietnam and meeting Vietnamese people affect you?
Most of the ones that I had dealing with were on a personal basis, were, like I said, the house girls, the cleanup crew that we had. And we would, in your off time, if things were quiet, we'd go downtown to the bars, and you end up talking to bar girls. I don't know that I knew that many just everyday, ordinary Vietnamese people. It was just, you're there doing the job. And
what did people chat about with the bar girls?
I'm sure it's the same chat that's been going on for 500 years. Hey, GI, you buy me a drink? Sure, I'll buy you a beer. No, champagne. No, that's so it's the same old story.
Do you remember taxi girls who would dance for a drink?
No, but they, I guess the idea behind every GI was the hopes of having sex at some point in time. But yeah, part of being a GI, no matter where you're stationed,
Did you witness prostitution in Vietnam?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There were, we had one guy in the company area that had a map of every little bordello or red light district there in the city of Nha Trang, or everyone he'd been to. But it was prevalent, of course. Even a wartime economy, a girl's got to do what she's got to do to make a living. It's so that was that.
Did you know anyone who had a Vietnamese girlfriend?
Yeah, one guy in the a black fella. He was married and had children at home, but he extended, and he fathered 2 children by the lady that was, actually she was my house girl along with several others, but he fathered 2 children by her. He's the only one that there were some other guys that the company had, but he's the only one I knew personally.
Do you know what happened to the woman or the kids he fathered?
Well, there was a prejudice towards, not because they were black, but because they were American, but probably more so because they were, half black and half Vietnamese, that they were kind of looked down on. I left country before he did, so I don't, and I'm sure whatever they went through wasn't pleasant, and it wouldn't have mattered if they were white. They would have been, they would have been half-breeds, I guess you would say.
Was this the case when you were there, that mixed-race kids were looked down on? Or was this after the fact?
You're talking about now what? The question one more time?
Yeah, was this the case when you were there, that mixed-race kids were looked down on?
To some extent. I'm sure that it became worse after we pulled out of Vietnam, you know. But I didn't see that. I didn't see that many of them. I did see George's two kids. They were cute, but you know, you don't know what happened to them. You know.
You mentioned off camera that you saw many Buddhist monks in Vietnam. Did you know anything about Buddhism before you went to Vietnam?
I did not then. I really don't know much about it now. You know.
Did anything about the monks surprise you?
No, I mean seemed like they were always barefooted and bald-headed. I remember the one in Saigon that set himself on fire. You know, there were a good many of them over there, but I never conversed with any. You know, just saw them.
Did you go into a Buddhist temple at any point?
I went into one and just looked around. You know, saw a lot of cats. You didn't see many cats out on in the areas of town. I understand that a lot of ate cats. I don't know that, but that's what they were told. But there were always a lot of cats in the Buddhist temples. You know, you'd see them hanging around there. You know, so I guess that was kind of a home base or safe spot for them. Yeah.
Apart from your friend George's kids, what do you remember about Vietnamese children?
They were cute. I have a few pictures at home where I walk around downtown with a camera and take pictures of them, and you know, most kids are cute anyway. You know, when they're little fellas.
Did you learn any Vietnamese words or phrases during your tour?
Mostly profanity, you know, and well, there was like Dee Dee Mao, get away, Dinky Dell, you're crazy. I guess the rest of it would be pidgin Vietnamese or pidgin English, you know.
Are you willing to give us an example of some of the profanity you learned?
I've actually forgotten most all of that. I really don't remember, you know. Anyway.
Did you experience any culture shock in Vietnam?
Well, aside from the fact of being basically a country boy from a cow town, yeah, it was a big culture shock going from when I was growing up. I graduated from high school in '65. I was in the last segregated class in the state of Florida. I mean, the whole state integrated the following year. And when I started going to college, we rode a bus over there, but we stopped and picked up 3 young black ladies. And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to black kids. And but there were, I guess the only culture that I ever saw to any extent was Cubans after 1959, because there was a huge influx of Cubans came into Florida, getting away from Castro, or fleeing Bautista and Castro coming in. And you know, they were kids. Some of them light skinned, some of them dark skinned. You know, they're kids. You know? And but I never saw that I can recall seeing an Oriental or Asian as a child growing up, you know. So that was kind of a shock for me, you know.
Do you remember racial tensions in the war zone between
Yeah.
black and white GIs?
Yeah, that was kind of prevalent. That was well, it was a pretty tense period. You know, I was there in '68 when I was at Fort Devens when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and it brought up a lot of tension, and that carried over to Vietnam because, you know, no matter how you feel about him, there was he was important to African American people, you know, and it just, there was a definite sense of tension, you know. We didn't have it so much with my company because we didn't have that many, like what I said, 3 or 4 guys in the company were black, but with other groups on base there, yeah, there was a good bit of tension, you know.
Do you remember any white service members celebrating King's death in Vietnam?
Not in Vietnam. We had a couple of rednecks when I was stationed in Massachusetts that were, oh, it serves him right. You know, that's, nobody deserves to be assassinated, you know, I don't think. Bad situation.
Do you remember any white supremacy symbols or black power symbols when you were in country?
There was a guy that I worked with in the shop, was from California. He didn't have any tattoos or patches or anything, but one of the most racist people I've ever met, you know, and the N-word was really prevalent in his vocabulary, you know. But I don't recall seeing, you know, overt signs and signals, you know.
Did he get in arguments with black GIs?
Oh yeah, yeah. And it was always just talk, you know, and a lot of blustering, posturing, you
know. Did you get sick or injured at all during your time in country?
I had been there, I don't know, about 3 weeks, and we were moving some stuff. I don't remember what we were moving. We were moving some stuff off a pallet, and I cut my finger pretty good on some banding material. Got a couple of stitches in my finger, and then after that, the only thing that happened to me was I extended for 3 months. I was supposed to go home in September of '69, but I extended for 3 months because I didn't know where my next duty station was going to be. And I was going to be home for Christmas to see my mom. But 30 days after Ho Chi Minh passed away, we had a little push into the compound, and it's in the middle of the night, and of course you don't turn any lights on, and I grabbed my weapon and my helmet and my flak jacket and my 2 magazines of ammunition, and I start out down the hall, and it's a 2-story billets, and I get to the top of the stairs, and somebody was in a bigger hurry than me and hit me in the back, and I went head over teacup down the steps, and it landed on my hip, and ended up with a big, I don't know what you say, cherry or strawberry bruise on my buttock, and after all that got over, the next morning I went down to the dispensary, and it was just jammed. There were people that were really hurt. And I said, knew better to go to the hospital because I knew it would be worse. And I was 22 years old, and I was bulletproof, or thought I was. I said, oh, hell, I'll be all right. Well, time I got to be up about 40, it starts talking to you, So cold weather and wet weather, it hurts, It doesn't show anything on the X-ray or an MRI, but it hurts, So that's where I suspect it comes from. That's, I didn't get any Purple Heart or anything. So.
On a lighter note, what was the most interesting food you ate in Vietnam?
Well, there was a French restaurant in town because the French were in Indochina before we were there, and a guy had stayed and opened a restaurant called Fregates, Fregates, and I ate escargot there, and of course, being a Florida boy, I had seafood, but it was the first time I had prawns, big giant shrimp. I don't know what kind of what kind of meat it was. I think it was ham, but everybody used to call them rat meat sandwiches. It was from a street vendor, I don't think it was rat meat. I hope it wasn't rat meat. Apparently, it didn't kill me, but I never ate any Chinese food or Oriental until I came back to the States. Just never around it as a kid, meat and potatoes and rice, homegrown vegetables,
Can you tell us about sea rations and the ration of cigarettes you received?
Well, about the first 6 months I was in country, we lived in squad tents, and we did not have a kitchen as such. So we were issued sea rations, and you just got a box. And, there were several entrees. There's spaghetti and meatballs. There was ham and lima beans. That's what I remember because everybody hated them. If you liked them, you could get all you wanted because nobody else would eat them. And then we came with a little cookie, and you got a little package of toilet paper. I think it was like 4 pieces of toilet paper. You had to be careful. You got a little pack of cigarettes, four cigarettes, and if you were lucky, you got Marlboros. A lot of times you get Lucky Strikes or something you didn't care for. It's actually I smoked a little bit before I went overseas, but that's actually where I really got into the habit of smoking was in Vietnam, because they were there, and there was a dessert, and sometimes you got pound cake. Everything was in a can, or it wasn't the best food in the world, but as my dad said, it'll warm up a cold, empty belly.
Did you also get an alcohol ration?
Yes. Now, if you were below the rank of E6, you could not buy hard liquor. There was what they call a Class 6 store, which I guess is alcohol. You had a ration card, and you could get, I don't remember if it was 2 cases of beer you could get a month or 3, and you could get wine, and it seemed like the only wine they had was Chianti, which to me is close to gasoline. But Al Gore takes credit for inventing the internet. I take credit for inventing the wine cooler because I couldn't stand Chianti, but if you took it and mixed it with 7-Up, it was drinkable. So I take credit for the wine cooler. which I think is much more important than the internet. But my ration card looked like a shotgun had hit it by the time I left country. You know, everything that I could get, I drank. You know, I became a world-class beer drinker over there. You know.
Well, I am honored to meet the inventor of the wine cooler. Do you remember any distinct animals during your time in Vietnam?
I would on occasion take some equipment down Highway 1 to Cameron Bay to a first-class electronics shop. And going through the countryside there, you'd see the Vietnamese version of a John Deere tractor, which was a water buffalo. You know, I don't recall seeing any reptiles, and I know they're there, but I didn't run into any tigers or anything else. You know, I think the water buffalo would be the only thing exotic that I saw. You know.
Did you have any pets while you were there?
There were, after we got our mess hall built, I think it's universal most anywhere that if there's a bunch of GIs, there's going to be some dogs. Excuse me. And we would come out of the mess hall and there'd be these 5 or 6 dogs out there and everybody just empty their plate out. They were fat as bears. And like I say, we didn't see many cats. And we had all the dogs named, and someone would come in the barracks and, you know, sleep in the same room with some guy. The Koreans next door to us, the dog is a delicacy to them, but they would not bother our dogs. You know, our dogs either had enough sense to hang around our company area and not go across the street, but every now and then you would see one, not one of ours, but you'd see a stray dog come through and go through the Korean area, and the cook would be out there, and you'd see him go in the mess hall and he'd never come out. So I'm sure he got butchered in there. But dogs were it primarily, as pets.
Do you remember any memorable experiences with rats?
No. Roaches I do, but not rats. I don't know, when I was a kid, I just had a strong aversion to roaches. One would crawl on me and I'd scream like a child. And after I was over there about 3 months, you get where you get off of me, you know. One of my friends used to say there was a roach so big in our barracks that he carried a butter knife, you know, and rode a rat, you know. So.
Did you ever see Vietnamese civilians collecting or using American trash?
Yeah, all the time. What's not useful to us might be useful to somebody else. And the other thing that you have to watch for when you're throwing things away is, can it be used against you? Can you make an IED? We didn't call them IEDs then. We call them booby traps. Is it something that, you know, like a tin can? You don't think about a tin can being dangerous, but if you put a grenade inside of it, pull a pin and put a tripwire on it, it's deadly, you know, just a simple tin can. So you have to be careful what you throw away, you know. Excuse me. And, you know, there were a lot of poor folks there. And they must have had some uses for some of the stuff they picked up. You know, I can remember seeing houses down there that would have beer cans that had been peeled out, and it was like siding. You know, the beer can's about the size of your tablet there when it's spread out, or maybe not quite that big. Might take 100 of them to cover the wall. It looked like a patchwork up there. So somebody's salvaging something. There's some use of it somewhere. So you have to be careful what you throw away.
Did you personally encounter the Viet Cong?
In a face-to-face meeting, no. I was on guard duty one night, and we had a penetration into the compound, and the OD, the officer of the day, called up a perimeter fire, and it's pitch black dark, and you're just shooting, just pow, 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 pow. And daylight the next day, between my guard shack and the next guy going down, there was 2 people out there in the wire, and whether I hit them or the other guy hit them, I don't know. But I never had a face-to-face confrontation with a Viet Cong or an NVA guy. No.
How many people generally were on your compound?
In my company, there was like 200 of us, but there was also the Korean battalion next to us was close to 1,000 people. 54 Signal Battalion was there, and they was probably 1,000 people. MP company, probably they about our size, about 200 or so. And then there was a motor, I'm guessing, 3,500, 4,000 people, something in that area.
Did you encounter Vietnamese POWs?
I did not.
Do you remember seeing Agent Orange being sprayed?
I did not see being sprayed, but where I was stationed, it's on the South China Sea, and we were on one side, all the groups that I mentioned to you, and then on the right side of us, if you're looking in from the ocean, was Nha Trang Air Force Base, and they flew Agent Orange out of there all the time, but I never saw it being sprayed.
Were you concerned at the time about Agent Orange?
Didn't have an idea what it was. Was clueless.
Was your compound cleared by Agent Orange before you got there?
Yeah, when I got there, it was, of course, they were calling it Tent City, and it had all the makings of a little community, except everything was canvas. So I mean, there wasn't any brush or anything. It was all a cityscape, I guess you'd say.
What were some of the ways you coped with the war?
Drank a lot. Like you say, my ration card looked like a shotgun hit it. I'm not proud of it now, but I was a world-class beer drinker, and I'd go to breakfast and come back and open a beer, and keep a buzz going all day long. There was marijuana was prevalent, and it was cheap. I never did it because back in those days, they were handing out life sentences if you got caught with with a significant amount of marijuana. I guess drinking was the way I coped.
How did people around you cope with the war?
Drank. We all did.
So, in your opinion, it's fair to say that alcohol was a key part of how people coped in Vietnam?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Did people mostly drink alcohol that was part of their rations, or did they go to a lot of bars?
If you had time off, and things were quiet, you could go downtown and drink. But if you went to the Class 6 store, I think a case of beer was like $2.50. It was a 10-cent a beer. If you went downtown, it was $1. And I think I was making, well, not counting hazardous duty pay. Well, counting hazardous duty pay, I was making just a shade over $200 a month. But I was trying to send my mother a little money, and the downtown budget wasn't there,
Do you remember humor or slang or jokes or pranks being a part of life in Vietnam?
Oh yeah, had to be. It's every new guy that comes in, you always make them do something. You send them to the motor pool to get a bucket of steam, and they'd head out that way. Send them to wash trucks. Just that's not our company. That's not our company. You need to wash it. Go wash it. Yeah. But that's just being GIs. You're gonna pick on each other all the time.
Were you aware of military personnel who opposed the war while in country?
No.
What was the most memorable friendship you had during your time in Vietnam?
J.P. Morgan, and that's his name, J.P. And he and I have kept up with each other for damn near 60 years, and we still correspond. He's a Oklahoma boy, and after we left Vietnam, we were stationed at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, together, and then I haven't seen him since then. But we just keep up with each other. So,
did you meet him in country?
Yeah.
Today, do you call each other or email?
We mostly call, about once a month or so, just, hey, how you doing, that kind of stuff.
What was the most beautiful thing you saw in Vietnam?
On the end of the compound, there was I guess you would say it was a small mountain or a big hill, one or the other. You could go to the top of that and you could look out of the South China Sea, and it was absolutely gorgeous if you looked out toward the ocean. If you look into it, it was a pile of poop. But that South China coastline was just amazing. And I've not been back and not going back, but where I was stationed in the train, capitalism apparently has done them some good. They have huge oceanfront hotels out. There's a giant Ferris wheel there, which none of that was there when I was, So they're taking advantage of that seascape, and it was, and with the right things being put there, I'm sure it's gorgeous,
What was the worst thing you saw in Vietnam?
Well, that would have been, as I was telling you, the night that we had the incursion there, after Ho Chi Minh had passed away 30 days previously, and we took significant rocket and mortar fire that night, and two guys got killed in a company up the road from us that never got out of bed. The rocket just hit on the roof and caught both of them in the bed. There was a lot of destruction that night.
Did you expect to survive the war?
I think everybody does. I was hoping to. Yeah.
Who did you write to or receive letters from while you were in Vietnam?
My mom, and my mom saved every letter that I wrote to her. I still have them, and we had one time when we got right busy with a campaign, and I would write to her about every 3 days. And we went about 2 weeks where she didn't get a note from me, and she sent me a self-addressed envelope with a note in there that said, "Write something to me." So, being a smart-ass youngin', I took the top off of the box of sea rations I got, turned it over on the blank side, wrote something, stuck it in the envelope, mailed it back to her. So I wrote something. She was primarily the only one I wrote to. I got a Dear John letter shortly after I got in country, so didn't have any lady to write to anymore, so, broke my heart, but we got over it.
Do you remember any American TV shows or songs from your time in Vietnam?
Oh yeah, the Rascals were, and I think Creedence Clearwater Revival. If you hear about me, I can tell you where I was. But when I did watch I watched it live. You folks had to watch it the next morning, but we watched it live on AFVN. Was the moon landing, because it happened like 2 o'clock in the morning in American time, but it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Vietnam. But we watched that black and white TV. That was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Did you watch it in a group?
Oh yeah. Somebody had at the PX. They brought in like a little 9-inch black and white TV, and there was probably 20 of us sitting in this one guy's room with their eyes all pegged on it.
What was the reaction like?
We were kind of amazed. It was quite a step. Because it just unbelievable. It still is to me today. That as President Kennedy said, we put a man on the moon and bring him home. Quite an accomplishment.
Do you have any memories of USO shows or recreation on base?
Oh yeah. We Ann Margaret, bless her heart, she came to Cameron Bay, and I don't remember how I got to go. I guess I wiggled some time off somewhere, and I went down there, and there's just a sea of olive drab uniforms. And Ann Margaret came and said, and she was about that big, on stage. But she came. She and Bob Hope were there, of course. I don't remember who else was there. That's the only USO show I saw. Every now and then we would have wait a minute. We had the Serendipity Singers came to the Air Force Base. And that's who Kenny Rogers was with before he went out on his own. There's one other group that came through, and then you'd have some guys that just, like a local band would show up, be Americans, and we'd go,
Were there any other forms of recreation on base?
Well, we had a basketball court. Didn't have a swimming pool. We didn't have tennis courts. I think basketball was about it. And of course, nobody played soccer back in those days. That's about all I can remember.
What was your most expensive or frequent purchase at the PX?
The most expensive thing I bought was a Minolta SRT 101 camera, and it was $126, which was about my spendable income for that month. But I took a lot of pictures with it, and you can't even get parts for that camera anymore. I still got it, but then nobody uses film anymore. Everybody uses a cell phone. And I bought a stereo receiver while I was over there, and it was $126 also. It was a Kenwood. That was about it as far as the big ticket items go. You know.
Did you buy any Vietnamese souvenirs?
Not really. I think the only thing I have that I would say is a souvenir. I've got a couple of coins, and I have a 20 piastre note, with South Vietnamese, and it was worth about 20 cents then, so it's absolutely useless today except as a keepsake. But no, I don't have anything that's near and dear to my heart.
Did you buy anything for your mom?
I did. I bought a bottle of Chanel No. 5 for her. I bought a pearl necklace. It was a large single pearl. Some other piece of jewelry, but I can't recall what it was.
Sounds like you're a very good son.
I hope so.
What was R&R like, and where did you go?
Well, in February of '69, I got sent on temporary duty to Bangkok, Thailand, for a school on a piece of long-range directional finding equipment. I was there for 30 days, and I thought Bangkok was a fantastic town. So when it came up for time to go to R&R, I was debating between going to Australia or going back to Bangkok, and I said, I'm gonna go back to Bangkok. It's quite a city, I liked it.
That's the end of my in-country questions. Is there another story we haven't talked about from your time in Vietnam that you'd like to share?
No, not really. I think we've covered about everything.
You returned to the U.S. in early December 1969, and you brought us a Stars and Stripes from that date. Can you tell us what it was like coming home when the My Lai massacre was front page news?
It's been so long ago. I think as an enlisted guy, I think the majority of the people that were my peers would have thought it was a classic thing of poop rolling downhill, that I'm not sure that Lieutenant Calley did that without orders. I don't know. Of course, he's dead and gone now. Nobody knows but him and the Lord. But it was, it's a significant piece of history, and obviously it did happen. But like I said, I have personal doubts about whether. I think he was guilty, yes, but I think he did it under orders.
You continued to serve in the military until 1971. In that time, Did you see morale change or an increase in things like anti-war GI newspapers?
No, it's, when I got to Fort Huachuca, probably half of the guys in the company were Vietnam vets. And short timers, as they say, waiting to get out. But I didn't see any anti-war stuff. I had a friend of mine that he bought a Peugeot four-door sedan that was about 10 years old or older, and somewhere or another he found a peace sign decal that had a black outline of the peace sign, but then it had stars and stripes. And he got hassled by a colonel at the PX for having that, and Bob wasn't necessarily anti-war. He just thought it was cute. He did get out, but he had to scrape it off his car. So the colonel didn't like it.
Let's talk about your post-service life. What relationship in your life was most changed by your service?
Relationship change. I guess I'm a lot more grateful for everyday life here. Everything, I've had a few bumps in the road, one thing and another, but since December the 2nd of 1969, life's been pretty good, Nobody's shooting at me anymore, so I been married twice and just day-to-day life, had a job, worked, that's it.
How did your mom react to you getting home from Vietnam?
She was elated, that I was her baby boy, as she said. And Easter just passing makes me think that I got an Easter basket from my mother every year that I was alive up until I put her in a nursing home. I got an Easter basket from her when I was in Vietnam. You're supposed to be over there and be rough and tough, and then they're going, here you get this Easter basket with a damn toy rabbit in it. But all the guys ragged me. Of course, they all helped eat the candy and the cookies, but I was her baby boy, and my siblings all say I was the favorite child, and I tell them that, well, look what you had to choose from, so it's easy to see why I was a favorite. But she and I were pretty close, and I had some health scares when I was a young lad, and I think that's one reason why Mom worried about me more than she did the others. Not that she loved me any better, she just worried more about me,
You mentioned being a Republican growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Did the war in any way shape your view of Richard Nixon?
No. He got us out of Vietnam, Watergate changed my view of him a good bit, but I don't think the war changed my opinion of him,
Did you know any anti-war veterans?
I can't say that I did. I went to Florida about 4 months ago. And I took one of my pups with me and went to a dog park in Ocala, Florida. And I was wearing a hat that says Vietnam veteran on it. And the guy walks up to me and he said, "You in Vietnam?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I protested the war. What do you think about that?" I said, "Did you dodge the draft?" "Well, yeah." I said, "Okay, bye." But that's, I don't, I knew some guys that were draft dodgers, but only I think they were scared. Hell, I was scared. Everyone's scared. If you're not scared, you're crazy. But I don't think that I ever knew anybody that was just adamantly anti-war.
By draft dodger, what do you mean?
Well, the draft was right conspicuous then. It's why a lot of guys stayed in school. That's why a lot of guys got married, because there was a college deferment, there was a marriage deferment, and you had some guys that got married solely for the purpose that, if you get married and have a kid, you'd get a deferment, you wouldn't go. Like my dad used to say about being in World War II. He said, "Anybody ask you what you did in the war?" You say, "Well, I didn't get a college deferment, and I didn't hide behind a woman's skirts."
Did you know anyone who moved to Canada?
No, not personally.
Have you been to the Wall in D.C.?
I have not. Now, whatever they call it, the mobile wall or the wall that heals, the one that came to Aiken, 12, 15 years ago. And I went up and saw that, and of course they were reading all the names from day one to day last of people that were killed, and it was a surprising amount of emotion came out there. And even though, like I say, even though I'm a non-combatant, you think about 59,000 guys, and a majority of them 18, 19 years old, And you think, of course, back then you think, well, that's men that died. Now, when you get my age, nearly 80, they're just kids. They really are. I think the youngest one on the wall is 15. And there's 8 ladies, one from Allendale. And but just, it really surprised me how emotional I got over that. I keep saying I want to go see it in person, and but I don't want to turn it into a big blubbering mess there either, So,
have you seen pictures of the Wall in D.C.?
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
When they were talking about it, I was kind of skeptical of the design. And then once it was built, it's just overwhelming, It's a big, huge gash in the earth. And, for all practical purposes, you can say the names on that wall, it equates to the city of Aiken being gone, 59,000 young men and women. I don't know, I get choked. I don't know what to say.
Do you remember it being controversial?
Oh, yeah. There were a lot of people that didn't didn't like the idea of the wall. They didn't like the idea that the lady that designed it was an Asian. It was an unfitting tribute. I think all of that's changed now, you know.
You mentioned that you haven't been back to Vietnam.
And not going.
Why not?
I didn't lose anything there. Nothing I want to go see. Again, you know. There's some beautiful parts of the country. Just have no desire to go back, you know.
Would you like to go back to Thailand?
That'd be okay. I would probably rather go to Norway, you know, where my dad's people are from. Not a significant world traveler. You know, so.
This is my last question.
Good. I hate tests.
Do you have a favorite book, poem, or movie about Vietnam?
I can't remember the name of the book. I guess I could say yes, I do, but I don't remember the name of it. But you could tell that the guy that wrote it had been there, you know.
What is the book about?
Him going back to Vietnam after the war and on a covert mission to repatriate some remains. That's, and I guess the reason I read that is I'm in the Vietnam Veterans of America, and that's one of our missions is to make sure that nobody gets treated the way that Vietnam veterans were treated when we came home. And that same thing applies to anybody during that time period, because there were folks that served in Europe that never went to Vietnam that got the same abuse just strictly because they were in uniform. That's one of our, and the other thing is we are seeking to repatriate the remains of POWs and MIAs. There's still some missing in Vietnam, in Laos, and Cambodia, and surrounding areas.
All right. Well, Mr. Olson, thank you so much for talking with us and for sharing your stories.
All right, thank you.